All right, let's look a little further into file input and file output. These ones are going to be a little more complicated, but still kind of use the same basic principles as file input and output from before. So first thing, this one's going to read a fixed length records, or this is called fixed length records. Basically, we're being passed a file with the name P. We're also being passed a string for the first name in the variable named F, and the string for the last name in the variable named L, and a new birthday in the variable named B. Okay, now if you saw my previous video, I kind of talked about variable names and how much I don't like the way that Codio is naming these variables. They should be a lot more descriptive than just single letters. So if you do anything on your own, I recommend using much more descriptive variable names than single letters. All right, so what we need to do, the length, excuse me, the file is structured that each field that you should be looking at is its own length, okay, of characters, a certain number of characters. This is called obviously either fixed length or length delimited files. A delimiter is just what tells you where one field ends and a new one begins. So in this case, it's delimited by the length of the line. I really don't like these either. They're not very useful. They are complicated. They're hard to maintain. You'll see that here in just a little while too. There are much better ways to format your files, but you may still see some length delimited files. Excuse me. So knowing how to do this can be useful. Alright, so I have this here. Now again, if you're using Codio, you will not want to set these values specifically. Those are coming in from the command line. I don't have Codio, so I have to set my own values in order to test them and write the code. All right, so first thing first, what we need to do is we need to read the file, get the records, and then what we need to do is look for the first and last name where they match, and then we need to change the birthday that's associated with that to the one that they give us, okay? And then we need to save the file back out. All right, now this hint here, the name characters are the name fields are 16 characters, and then the birthday is 8 characters. So let me kind of show you. Here's my file, the length delimited structured file. As you can see, it's kind of difficult to read, and it goes on for a little while. This is a pretty short one, but it could be as long as it needed to be. Right? It could be an arbitrary length. It could be many records, but it's all going to be on one line. So you can see that this is extremely difficult to maintain, to modify, to update, or whatever you need to. And not only that, but if you modify it, you have to be very careful, because let's say I said, oh, you know what, Theodore, his last name isn't Anderson, it's Anders. And I go, okay, let's just change that. There we go, we're done. We save it, we leave it. That broke everything. Everything after the word, after Theodore. And that's because now Anders, this last name, is only 14 characters long. But the code should process for 16, so it's going to see that as the last name, and it's going to just throw off everything, and then it's going to look for the date of birth being 8 characters, which is that, and you can see that causes major problems. So what you would have to do is you'd have to add in 2 spaces to take those places, and it can be a mess, so you got to be very careful. Okay, so yeah, that's the file and what it looks like. Now what we need to do is read it in, and then put that into some structure that we can actually manipulate and look at and modify, and then we need to modify it and then write it back out in the same format. Okay, it's very important. If you write it out into a different format, then this program can only be done once. Right? You have to put it back into the same format so that you can reread it later the same exact way that you read it the first time. Okay. So first things first, we'll go ahead and just read the content in, and if you haven't seen the video that I did on basic file input, then make sure to check that out if you have any questions here. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open up the file for reading. Okay, and the file is located in the path P. Okay, you don't have to use a variable name here. You could use that as the argument if you wanted to, but in this case I have it as a variable, so that's how it's going to be. So, and then you want to open it in with the read mode, which is that R there. Read mode, since we're not going to be writing at this moment. And then I'm going to do something like, I don't know, full content equals records file dot read. Okay, so what this is doing now, it's opening up the file, that records file, that's this one here, and it's going to read all of that into one string and put it in here as a string. So yeah, that's it. So we've read the file. Cool, awesome. As soon as we finish up this block, since we're using this with statement here, it automatically closes the file that we opened up for reading. But that's okay because we have all the contents in this string here. The next step, this is where it gets a little tricky. So what we need to do is we need to process it in such a way that we look at the first 16 characters, up to there, and that is the first name. Then we look at the next 16 characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. That's the last name. Then we look at the next 8 characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that is the date of birth. And that's one whole record. So the whole record is a total of 40 characters. Okay. Then it starts over. The next 16 characters are the next first name, the next 16 characters, the next last name, and the last, then the next 8 characters of the date of birth. So it gets kind of tricky. But since we know the exact structure, we can use that. And since each field is not the exact same length, you have one that's 16, another that's 16, and then one that's 8. We can't use something like field length, all right, equals 16, because that won't be true for every single field. So that gets tricky, huh? So let's try, and instead you can we'll create a list of the lengths. So we have 16 for the first one, 16 for the second one, and then 8 for the third length of the field in one record, in one row of data, basically. Okay. Now we also want somewhere to store the data that we read in, because we want to have it in a structure that we can manipulate. So I'm going to do another list. Okay, I'm going to set it to an empty list because we're going to add to it later. I don't know what the data is yet because that's all in the file I need to read. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to take each of these and we want to add them into basically a list of lists. So we'll see here. I want to take this first part, okay, add it to a list, a temporary list. Then I'm going to take the next part, the last name with the trailing spaces, add that to the next part, to the next field in the same temporary list, and then I'm going to add the date of birth. That way they're all kind of together. And then what I want to do is add that list of one record, of each field in one record, to the main list of the records. So it should be a list of lists. Hopefully that'll make sense here in a little while. And then what I need is some value so that I know where inside this string to start. So real quick, full content, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be this entire thing from position 0 all the way up to the end. And we remember that each field, each record is going to be a total of 40 characters. So we have 1, we have 2, we have 3, we have 4, and we have 5 total records. So that is a total of 200 characters. Okay, 40 records. 40 characters for each record, and what did I say? 5 records. So that's 200 characters. Okay, so when I read it in, I need to know, alright, I need to check, starting at position 0, I need to check the first 16 characters, that's the first field of the first record. Then I need to check the next 16 characters, starting at position 16 then, inside the full content, and then go for 16, that's the next field, and so on and so forth. So that's why I need some variable so I know where to start and how far to go in the string. Okay. So I'm going to do a while loop here. While my start value is less than the length of the full string, right? Full content. Okay, so remember the full content was a total of 200 characters. So I start at 0. 0 is less than 200. Yes, it is. And then I'm going to move this up. So I'm going to move this up to 16. Then 16 is still less than 200, and it's just going to keep going like that by each of these. So it's going to go up 16, then it's going to go up 16, then it's going to go up 8. Then it's going to go up 16, then it's going to go up 16, then it's going to go up 8, and so on and so forth up until it gets to be 200. And then I know I've reached the end of the file. All right, hope that makes sense. So now I want to create my temporary list that will hold each field for one record. Okay, so what I want is I want a list that is going to hold this value, and this value, and then I want to add that list to the main list. All right, so let's get started on doing that. So I'm going to do a for loop, and I want to loop through this guy so I know how much to check. For field length, I'll call it field length just so it's easy to see and understand inside my lengths. Alright, so as soon as it starts, that for the field length is going to start out at 16, and then it's going to do that iteration. Then it's going to go up to the next value at 16, then the next iteration is going to be 8, and then that loop is done. Okay, then we can move on to the next record. Okay, so I want to get the field, so I'm going to do, I don't know, we'll call it field value or something, field equals, and then what I need to do is I need to search inside this full content, okay, inside full content, and the string is technically also a list. So you can index the string just like you can a list. It's a list of characters all strung together, right? So I want to start at the start position, okay? So I want to start at character 0, position 0, and I want to read for 16 characters. So let's see, we'll start at, well, it starts out at 0, right? Then I want to read for 16 characters. That's going to be, well, it's, okay. So the way this works, start plus, let's see, field length, because that's the 16 that I'm looking for. So the way this works, this is called string slicing or list slicing even, and the colon is what's used to separate. So I start at some value here, and then I go up until some value here. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to read from position 0, and then I want to read all the way up to position 16. Okay. Then I should change my start value to be 16, and then I want to read from position 16 to position 32, the next 16 characters. Then I should set my start value, then I want to read from 32 up to 40, all right? And then I'm just going to keep moving like that. So that's what will happen. So now the field is going to be from start, which is 0, up to start plus the field length, which starts out at 16 on the first iteration. So that's going to read from here to here, including all the spaces. Okay? So that should get all that out. Cool. So that's going to be set as the value here in field. Now I want to add that to my temporary record here, record.append, and then we're going to say, well, I want to append the field. Now the problem with this, because there's a bunch of white spaces here. There's in this case for Adam, there's 12 white spaces that I don't really want in my field because I'm going to be comparing it. And you'll notice up here, Adam is only 4 characters. It doesn't have the 16. So if I were to try to compare F to field, even though technically that's what I'm looking for, it's not going to match because it's going to compare Adam of 4 characters to Adam plus 12 spaces. So that's not going to work. So what I need to do is strip off the end and take away those spaces. And it just so happens that there is a function for that in Python, a built-in function, so let's use that. It's called the strip function. How convenient is that? So what that'll do is it'll take, in this case, this whole string, Adam, right? You call strip on it, and what it's going to do is it's going to take away any extra spaces that are at the beginning and or the end. In this case, there are none at the beginning, so it's just going to take them off at the end, right, and strip those out. That sounds just about perfect. There is also lstrip to strip just the left side of the string, or rstrip to strip just the right side of the string. But strip will do both the left and the right, so it depends on what you want to do. So yeah, that's it. Now what we need to do is just adjust our starting value for the next record. So start was at 0. We want to change start to now be its current value plus the field length, right? And remember, this plus equals operator is the same as start equals start plus field length. Okay, so it's a little bit shorter shorthand there. And yeah, that's it. So what this will do is it's going to loop through the entire list here and just keep getting the fields, the first 16, then the next 16, then the 8, oops. And it's going to keep adding that to this record here. And then it finishes that record. Now what I need to do is I need to add that record, right, which has a list of each field. I want to add that to my main list of records up here. So what I need to do now is records.append and my one record. Okay. Once it does that, then it jumps back up here to the top. Start is now 40, should be, after the first iteration, or the first, after I get the first record. 40 is still less than 200, so it's going to continue here. It's going to reset record back to an empty list because we don't want to keep the data from the previous record. And then it's going to go ahead and get the next one. It's going to just go through here. Now instead of starting at 0, it's going to start at 40, and it's going to get the first name, then it's going to get the last name, then it's going to get the date of birth, add that to my list, right? And it's just going to keep doing that all the way until it gets to the end of the file. So there we go. That will parse the data correctly for you, hopefully, and we'll test this out here just to make sure. But that's kind of how that works. I hope talking through the logic there kind of helped it to make sense. So once we have that done, you should get a list of lists that looks something to this effect. Okay, so you'll have that in there, that as the next one, and then that, and so on and so forth. Okay. Yep. Oh, and I'll point this out real quick. You can simplify this down into one line if you want to. So notice that this is taking the field and stripping it, but this is what's getting the field. So you could do something even to this effect and eliminate one whole line of code. So it's getting, that gets the field, and then once the field is retrieved, then it strips it. So you can simplify that if you want to. You don't have to. For readability, I'll leave it here just so it kind of separates what's going on. But like I said, it is very common to simplify things and split them down. Simplify them, put everything into one line if you can. Alright, so now we have our data, we have the records here. What we need to do is look through it and figure out where Adam and Smithers match in the same record, and then we need to change the date of birth to the new date of birth, or birthday. Alright, so now what we just need to do is we need to loop through for row in records, and you could call this whatever you want to. You could call it line, you could call it record, whatever kind of makes sense to you. I'm going to call it row because it is a row inside the records list of lists. Okay, so on the first iteration, row is going to be set to this guy, which is also a list. So row is going to be a list, and then on the second iteration, it'll be the next list. Third iteration will be the next list, and so on and so forth until we get all the way through. Now we just need to check and see if the value in the first name matches the first name that was given to us. So if our row, and then we got to get an element in it, so we're going to use the index, which is these square brackets, at index 0. Remember, a list always starts at 0. Okay, so that's going to return the first name value, and then we'll just check and see if it equals our first name. So if row is equal to, with the double equals, F, which is our first name, and Adam, which in this case it is, cool. And we also have to check the last name, so it's not just the first name because we want to change Adam Smithers, not Adam Smith. And then we also want to check the last name. If the element inside the row at the position for the first name is equal to first name, and the element inside this row at the position of the last name is equal to the last name, right? Then hey, now we know we've got the right row, if those two are true. Okay? Now what we need to do is change the birthday inside the row, right, which is at position 2, it's the third element, right? We just need to change that, and we'll use the single equal sign because that's the assignment operator, to the new birthday. Right? Simple enough. And then I'm going to add this break line, break keyword, that way it won't move on. So it's going to look through this first one, that's not going to match. It's going to look through the second one, that's not going to match. It's going to look through the third one, that's not going to match. And then it's going to look through this one, that one matches. It makes the change that it needs to, and then there's no need to look at the next one because that's not going to match. We already found it, we already made the modification. So I'll just add this break, and that's just going to break out of this loop, this for loop right up here. Okay? You don't have to have that in there, but I like it. So it can be, if you had a list of, let's say, 100,000 names or 100,000 records, and you found it on the third record, right? Why continue on to the extra 99,997 records when you've already done what you need to? So for a small program like this, it's not a big deal. For a big chunk of data that you're looking at, it's important. It can definitely save you some time. All right, so now that we have made the modification, we need to write the data inside this list with the new birthday back to the file in the same format that it was when we read it the first time. That way we can reread it if we want to. So that gets a little tricky too. But what we want to do is we want to, since it's, remember we read it in and it was all just one string when we read the file, we want to write it all as one string too. So I'm going to do output, I'm going to set output, and I'm going to set it equal to an empty string to start. Okay, an empty string is either single or double quotes with nothing inside, not even a space. If there's a space inside, it is no longer an empty string. It is a string that has a space in it. Okay, it's not empty. And if you were to start it out like that, you would throw off your entire file. You'd have a space here at the beginning, and now the first record is actually 41, and everyone after that is 40 characters, and it would just throw off everything entirely. You'd have crashes galore when you try to read it again. So make sure there is no space in between. You can use either single or double quotes, it doesn't matter. No space. Alright, so now what I need to do is I need to loop through the full list, and then I need to loop through each sublist, and then put each field into this string, okay? But I need to make sure it is the correct size. So instead of just Adam plus 12 characters. So let's see here. Alright, so I'm going to do, I can use row again. For row in records, then what I need to do is I need to loop through each of these. So on the first iteration, row is going to be equal to this guy here, and what I need to do is loop through that. So I could do something like for, I don't know, val in row. But now I'm going to come across a problem, because now I don't know how long this one has to be. Okay, and what I can do is I can use this array as well, or this list of lengths, and I probably want to do that because it's going to help me out. So what I'm going to do is instead I'm going to use an index. Okay, that way I can index this list and I can index this list. Now you'll notice something here. Okay, lengths is 3 long. It's got 3 elements in it, and so does each of these records. Okay, records also has 3, and you may also know that the first element in the record corresponds to the first element in the length. That's how long that first element needs to be. And the second element with the second element in this one, and the third element with the third element in length. This is something called parallel arrays, or lists, parallel lists. So when you have two or more lists that are the same size, and one element in one list corresponds to another element at the same position in another list, you have parallel lists or parallel arrays. That can be very useful when you need to link information based on its position in the array or in the list. Okay, so what I'm going to use here is I'm going to use an index. For index in, and now I'm going to use the range function. I need to get all the way up to, from 0 up to the length of row. This would also work if you did the length of this length. Since they're parallel arrays, they're going to be the same size. You can do it either way. But now what it's going to do on the first iteration, it's going to be 0. That'll let me access this element and this element. That way I know, all right, those two are linked. So I hope that kind of makes sense. It's a parallel array or a parallel list, and they can be very useful. So now what I need to do is I need to set output, right, plus equals, which is the same as output equals output plus some value, but I'm going to do plus equals because it's simpler and quicker. Alright, so now I need to add the element from row, okay, at the value of the index, which is going to start at 0 and then go to 1 and then go to 2. Okay, and I need to add that to this output, but I need it to be the exact length that I need of, in this case, 16. So how do we do that? Well, there's another string function built in, which is super helpful, super handy, and that will let me adjust the size of it. Okay, ljust stands for left justify. So what that does is you pass in a number here. Okay, so if I pass in 16, for instance, it's going to make this string be exactly 16 characters long with spaces to fill up any extra room. Okay, and since it's left justified, what that means is the text, the actual text itself, is going to be on the left side of the string, which is exactly how it is right here. You'll notice this is left justified in the field of 16 spaces, or 16 characters. So that's perfect. Now I don't want to hard code 16 here, because if I do that, then it won't work for the birthday. Instead, what I want to do is I want to use that same index to reference the position in lengths, since that's also going to correspond with the position that I'm looking at inside the actual list here. So I'm going to get my lengths, lengths at position index. Okay, same one. Alright, and that's it. I mean, that's going to format the data now so that I can write it out to the file. We're almost done. Now all that's left, so let's recap kind of what we've done so far. We have read the file, gotten the information. We have parsed the data into a structure that we can more easily read and manipulate and modify. Then we have modified the data that we needed to. And now we have reformatted the data so that we can write it back out to the file. Now the last step is to write it to the file. So I'm going to use this structure here, open, and then we're going to use the same file path as we did before, right? Since it's all going to the same file. Open, and now instead of reading, we want to write it. Okay, now I mentioned this in my reading and writing one. So the W is the mode to write the file, as we'll call it write file. And now we just need to call our handler write file dot write and tell it what we want it to write. Well, that's our cool formatted string, which will end up looking something just like this. The only difference is that it should have the new birthday in it, which was all zeros. Okay, and that's it. So we've read the file, we've modified, we parsed it, we modified it, we reformatted the text or the data so that we can write it to the file again, and now we've written the file. So let's go ahead and run this and make sure this works. So what we should see on Adam Smithers, okay, instead of 10/10/1960, we should have all zeros. So let's look at our file here and look at what we're looking for. So here we've got Adam Smithers 1010 1960. So let's run this and see what happens. Run, done. Alright, no errors, that's good. And aha! There's our data. Look at that, all zeros. It worked, and it still looks like the same way that it was before. And we can test that, okay? And let's run this again. This time we're going to change the date of birth back to 10/10/1960. Oh, I was not typing. 10/10/1960. And if we reformatted it correctly, we should be able to reread it and reparse it with the exact same code. All right, so let's run this and make sure it works. Nothing blew up, that's good. And there it is, look at that, it went right back. So there you have it. That is a little bit more advanced stuff with the file input and output. I hope it all kind of made sense and is logical for you, but you can do a whole lot with these reading and writing files and parsing data and all that good stuff.